Here with me now from Wisconsin, where she is campaigning for Donald Trump, is South Dakota Republican Governor Kristi Noem. Thank you so much for being here, Governor. I want to start with what we've heard a lot of from the former president since he was found guilty in his New York hush money trial. And that is repeatedly suggesting that he would prosecute his political opponents if he is elected. Listen to part of what he said.
It's a terrible precedent for our country. Does that mean the next president does it to them? That's really the question. And it's very possible that it's going to happen to them.
Based on what they've done, I would have every right to go after them. Revenge does take time, I will say that.
It does.
And sometimes revenge can be justified.
Governor, is that the message you think Donald Trump should be focusing on in this campaign right now?
Well, his message has clearly been that his only vengeance will be America's success. He is not interested in going after political opponents. He is interested in going back to the White House and working for the American people and their families, bringing down inflation costs. And that's what I'm hearing overwhelmingly here in Wisconsin, is that this swing state is so important. And these people here, their number one issue right now is not that sham trial and not the verdict and the convictions and not what's going on as far as what a lot of people are talking about in the media. They care about what's happening to their families, how much grocery prices have gone up, how much better their lives were 4 years ago. So that's really their number one concern.
Yeah, I mean, it seems clear what you're hearing from voters, that is what their concern is. But it is what we heard from Donald Trump this week over and over in interview after interview, that he is considering going after his political opponents. So should he stop doing that, given what you just said you're hearing from voters?
What he said is that he's warned the American people, if we start weaponizing the judicial system like they did against him, that it could happen to any president. It could happen to any political opponent. What he's talking about when he's having those discussions is that be careful what you do, because that opens the door in the future to anybody doing it. And that's what he's trying to shut down. He wants people to trust our judicial system. He wants to make sure that we still have law and order in this country. If you look at conservative areas of this country, places where Republicans were in control, we have law and order. We have peace and stability. You go to Democrat states and cities, that's where you see destruction, and you see judicial systems and trials and corrupt judges that prosecute their political enemies. That's what New York was. In New York, that was definitely a rigged election or a rigged judicial process against the president, politically motivated.
Well, he was found guilty based on a jury, 12 members of the 12 peers of his. The other thing I just want to mention, and I do want to move on, is that right now the Justice Department is prosecuting the president's son. President Biden's son is prosecuting a House Democrat, is prosecuting a Senate Democrat. So doesn't that fly in the face of the claim that the whole judicial system is weaponized against Republicans?
I don't think anybody believes the whole judicial system is. I think they see places in this country where it is. And New York was certainly one of those. And I don't know, Dana, if you read that letter from the judge in the New York City trial that came out that talked about the fact that some of these social media posts that came out before the decision and the verdicts even came out from that jury. So there may be a mistrial coming here because it was handled so poorly by this judge. And that's what I think that will be eye-opening to the American people, is they really, truly will have proof then that that judge was corrupt. He should have recused himself according to the ethics and rules of New York. He should never have presided over that whole process. And President Trump should have never been in that situation.
And I just want to say that those details have not been confirmed. Obviously, the trial is over. So I think you're probably referring to an appeal. I want to move on to some of the politics that we're seeing in the 2024 race. Specifically, Donald Trump is actively starting to look for a running mate. CNN is told that there are 7 potential Trump VP contenders receiving vetting material so far. You're not on that list. Do you have any indication that you're still under consideration to be Donald Trump's running mate?
I've told President Trump over and over again, he needs to pick whoever helps him win. I have been loyal to him since the very beginning when he first started to run in 2016. He's told me his priority is picking a running mate that can govern on day one. that has been loyal to him, that has the experience and run businesses, knows how to be a CEO, but also supports him in his policies. I don't care. I love my job in South Dakota. I care about the fact that I want him to win, and he knows that I will do that. So I talked to him 3 times yesterday. I think he's doing great and fantastic. I'm proud of him. I've never seen anybody get out of bed and work as hard as this guy does just because he loves America. And he's got a lot of corrupt criminals and a lot of political enemies coming after him, and he still gets up and fights for the average everyday American. That makes me proud of him.
On that list that I just showed, there were 6 men and one woman. Women, particularly suburban women, I don't need to tell you, could play a big role in who gets elected in November. Should there be a woman on the ticket, A, and B, you said he just needs to pick somebody who will help him win. Would you help him win?
Well, all the polls tell him in these swing states that a woman on the ticket helps him win. The polls just say that. 1 in 4 Republican women haven't made up their minds because they want to have a woman talking to them about the issues they care about. And women aren't monolithic. They don't care about just one issue. They care about health care. They care about their children. They care about their futures. They care about having an opportunity to have a business and to have a career. And all of that is being threatened under Joe Biden. But yes, the women vote is extremely important. And I've spent the majority of my time here in Wisconsin talking to women and talking to those people that are independent and on the fringe, and they're leaning towards Donald Trump, but they also want to know that their perspective is going to be at the table when decisions are made.
So he should pick a woman.
They want to know that there's going to be people involved. I think that would be beneficial, according to the polling that I've seen for him in a lot of swing states, is that having a woman that is helping him campaign makes a difference. Listen, I could be home in bed or feeding my horses right now or rocking my grandbabies, but I'm in Wisconsin because I believe President Trump needs to win. His policies are right for America, and they're perfect for South Dakota. And I want him to win, and the polling tells me that he needs women out on the campaign trail carrying his message about how much he cares about them and their future, too.
Let me ask you about a topic that is important to women, well, actually important to a lot of people, and that is contraception. Senate Republicans this week blocked a bill to protect access to contraception nationwide. As a matter of principle, do you think Republicans should support complete access to birth control?
Yes, I do. I think that bill was a joke. That bill was far-reaching in everything that was included in it. It wasn't just a single-issue bill, which in my book I talk about the fact that single-issue bills actually would fix a lot of what's broken in this country. But, absolutely contraception is something that should be available to women. And why can't we just start talking about the fact that a lot of women, when they're in their situations, they're in a crisis situation. Why don't we support them and give them information and help them? So I think that whatever we're talking about when it comes to women's health care, that's something that we as everybody in this America public needs to realize, is that these are difficult situations, and we need to love people and win their hearts and minds as well as talk about policy.
You mentioned your book, so I'm going to ask you about that because in that book, No Going Back, you came under pretty intense criticism, even from some members of your own party, because you shared a story about shooting and killing your 14-month-old dog, Cricket. Now that you've had time to process all of that, in all candor, do you have regrets?
You know, that story is a 20-year-old story of a mom who made a very difficult decision to protect her children from a vicious animal that was attacking livestock and killing livestock and attacking people. So it's in the book because it was difficult for me. And there's a lot in that book that I think people need to read. I don't know if you've read it or not.
I read the whole thing.
But it wouldn't be in the book if it wasn't a very hard situation. Oh, good. Well, I'm glad you did. Thank you for doing that. But there's a lot in that book that's very important, and I hope people will read it because it's a how-to guide for the average citizen on how to get their government back and why I believe that we need to have President Trump back in the White House.
Yeah, I did read the whole thing, and so I have the entire context of that incident.
Good.
And so what I'm hearing is no regrets, not just about writing about it, but
We've
of
covered
actually shooting the dog.
We've covered this, and I'm a mom and protected my children from a vicious animal. We just had a 9-year-old boy in South Dakota killed just days ago from a dog. That happens, and that 9-year-old boy will never be in his parents' lives again. He'll never be in his family's lives again. I think people are put in tough situations in life, and we learn from it.